Many building elements have a similar shape and size and have similar reinforcement arrangements. The Propagate Rebar tool allows rebar to be propagated from a source host to several destination hosts. You can also propagate rebar by face. This will increase your productivity when applying reinforcement to similar elements across concrete structures. Our task here is to add additional rebars to the columns and slab edge, including the starter bars for the columns. The columns have different section sizes, but will have similar arrangements of rebar. Rather than simply copying and editing the rebars, we will now use Propagate Rebar. The Propagate Rebar tool will use adaptive propagation, which respects things like rebar constraints and cover settings on elements. Let's begin by checking the cover settings on the columns. So here you can see that we have a column already reinforced, and if I select the column, in the Properties palette we can see here the rebar cover is currently set to interior shelves number 6 to number 18. We'll ensure that the cover settings are the same for these remaining columns on the front face. So I'm going to select the 3 columns here, holding down the Control key, and then in the Properties palette I'll make sure that the cover setting is again set to interior shelves 6 to number 18. Also, the starter bars are currently hosted into the floor. To ensure correct adaptive propagation, I'm going to temporarily host these starter bars into the column. So I'll use a window to select the 4 starter bars, and again in the Properties palette in the Instance parameters we can see that the host category is currently set to floor. On the Modify Rebar tab in the Host panel we'll go ahead and select Pick New Host. Let's now select the column. With the 4 starter bars still selected, again in the Properties palette I can see now the host category is correctly set to Structural Column. So we're now ready to use the Propagation tool. So we'll select the column, and on the Modify Columns tab in the Reinforcement panel we'll select Propagate Rebar. In the Propagate Rebar panel you'll notice that the default setting is Align by Host. This is what we're going to use to select the remaining front columns. So we'll select the column directly below the one that we've just selected, and we'll then hold the Control key down and select the other 2 columns directly below the first one. Looking at the preview here we can see that the adaptive propagation has worked correctly. Once we're happy with this we can go ahead here and select Finish on the Propagate Rebar panel. The reinforcement has now been propagated and added to the remaining columns. We can now change the host of the starter bars back to the floor. So I'll select the 4 starter bars here. On the Modify Rebar tab in the Host panel we'll select Pick New Host, and we'll select the floor here. And we'll now repeat that for the remaining starter bars. Okay, so we'll just complete the last 4 starter bars here and pick the last slab. So next we're going to have a look at propagating the U bars from the edge of this slab here to the remaining slabs that we can see within the project here. Let's go ahead and select the U bars on the edge of this slab, and once again on the Modify Rebar tab in the Host panel we can select Propagate Rebar. Now this time you'll notice in the Propagate Rebar panel we currently have Align by Face selected as default. This is what we're going to use. So you can see on the tooltip it's prompting us to select the source face. So that's going to be the front face of this slab. We're then prompted to pick destination faces. So I can select this face here, and we can clearly see that that adaptive rebar has now been propagated correctly. We'll hold the Control key down and select the remaining faces on the slab. The Propagate Rebar tool would also adapt the rebar to different elements and completely different orientations. So for example, if I select this edge here on the slab, we can again see the U-bars have been propagated. Of course we can actually change the shape handle here to make sure that the length isn't exceeding the floor. So we'll go ahead and select Finish. We'll select the rebar set that we've just propagated, and here we can see that we have the shape handle, and we'll just drag that back. And now to complete the propagation of the rebar, we can go back up to the Modify Rebar tab, and in the Host panel we can select Propagate Rebar again. This will now be the source face, and we can then select the destination faces. And of course I'll hold the Control key down to allow me to select this face here, and also this face down here on the slab. Again, once we're happy with the adaptive propagation, we can complete the task by selecting Finish. OK, so our rebar has now been successfully propagated to different elements.